What is up, everyone? It's Chris Primo. Here we got Adam with Anabolic Climbing. Today we're just going to be, getting into how our groups intersect a little bit with, PED applications. He's super into, rock climbing and how different PEDs can apply for that sport as well as other sports. We're going to talk a little bit about GH today. That collagen synthesis, how different steroids affect collagen synthesis. So it should be a pretty good episode. We're going to be getting pretty deep on some of this stuff. Adam has done obviously a lot of research on this. So if you just want to introduce yourself, Adam, we can get into it.
Yeah, Chris, first off, appreciate you having me on. It's always really good to connect with another fellow collagen enthusiast. So, for the better part of the last 40 years in climbing, people have doped, but nobody talks about it. And there's just been this glaring hole in the climbing community where there's fascination in PEDs, but like people read one meta analysis saying that that testosterone isn't great for tendons, and then everyone stopped looking. And when I got into climbing 8 years ago, I assumed that like somebody would have gone really deep into this by now, and then just like nobody did. So when I decided to hop on the sauce, I decided to both like document and research everything that I knew I was going to be taking, sort of document what I was testing, what worked, what didn't work, and really just trying to research as much as I could about tendons. I had followed bodybuilding for probably like 18 years. So knew like surface level a decent amount about pharmacology. But then I realized the cross section of how things affect tendons was like very different from what I assumed, and just started going down like a really deep rabbit hole. And that's kind of the origin of the channel and my research. And since then, it's been about, I've tested like roughly give or take 20 different compounds. Made really cool strength gains in my climbing, which has been super fun. There's a climb I'm trying to do out in France. I was trying to do it this year. It'll probably be next year. But it's been really fun to both like get enhanced, learn about this, slowly build a community around it, which has been growing a lot in the past couple of months, and also connect with really smart folks like yourself. So thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. And I mean, I guess the first thing I want to ask, I feel like I can kind of imagine why climbing is one of the sports where collagen matters the most. I would think it's just because of like your fingers, right? Just because you have to have like that's kind of where the tendons are the most important. Everything else is sort of just like muscular endurance and like back muscle strength, and then technique, of course. Is that correct, or like what makes climbing like a sport where collagen and tendons are so important?
So yeah, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. People tend to think fingers over everything, and you still ultimately need the technique to be able to execute the moves. But I think that the climbing community really sleeps on strength as well. There's so many really powerful moves, whether it's like it's called the dyno, where you basically jump from one move to another, or then a lot of folks also sleep on leg strength. I know climbers tend to neglect their legs because like they're trying to be as light as they can going up the wall. And I know guys that brag about how small their legs are and then don't realize that they've had 5 ankle surgeries and not put 2 and 2 together. And I'm just thinking, okay, I guess we're going to ignore that. But there's sort of there's also a misunderstanding of how tendons and strength kind of intersect as it relates to fingers. Like the fingers need to be able to be, like the tendons need to be capable to hold the load, but you're still generating force from this part of the forearm and the muscle. And the short answer is strength matters a hell of a lot, as well as collagen synthesis and tendon integrity. And there's also a really cool timing element that matters, particularly around like the 6-week mark is where you seem to see like the largest strength disparity between the tendons and the muscles. So scheduling deloads or sort of pulling back your training around those points so that you don't get hurt. And also, like when you first hop on a compound, leaving a little bit left in the tank so that you don't hurt yourself by overshooting the tendon, things like that.
That's something we hear in bodybuilding a lot too. And powerlifting, like if you're using something, you have to be careful to not like overexert yourself, like especially something that increases strength so much as like tren. It can be really easy to think, well, your muscles are so much stronger than your tendons are used to. Like one thing, his name's Josh. He's a registered nurse. He was telling me is you should, like when you're using these compounds, you should treat your body as if you're like 8 weeks behind, because your tendons actually are, but your muscles, because how well they respond to androgenic stimulus, as well as your brain, you're going to think you're way stronger, whereas your tendons, like, it doesn't work exactly like that.
There's definitely a lot of riding the line. And, I've been lucky that there are so many other sports that document stuff like this. So it's like you're going in kind of blind, but not completely. But, one of the smarter things that I did was hire a coach out of the gate so that they could basically force deloads on me and say, hey, kind of pull me back so I don't end up hurting myself. So that part's been really good. But yeah, I one of the reasons I started this project outside of just wanting the juice because it's fun is to help other climbers that wanted to end up doing this so that they could sort of prevent themselves from some of these pitfalls.
Okay. I feel like the natural, like, next step of, like, where, like, from anabolics is to think about, like, peptides and stuff like that, right? Like,
Hmm.
we hear, BPC supposedly increases your tendon responsiveness to IGF-1. Like, I feel like almost that stuff would be as important as anabolics for something like climbing. Like, I have a buddy who's an arm wrestler, and, like, that's kind of their bread and butter, is like, it's not even so much how strong your muscles are, it's how strong your tendons are.
So we do actually have a couple of arm wrestlers in our community from the UK who we adore. I think it's kind of both, right? You need the tendon to have the structural integrity to not break under the force. But I think Devin Laird actually said that the muscle matters way more than the tendons. And he, as his career went on, went deeper into the muscle and probably steroid side. But I do think that peptides, there's kind of an age divide, right? I think most of the younger climbers are really into peptides because they're not ready to shut down their endocrine system or risk PCTs and stuff like that. And I think most of the older climbers that have been doing this for a while that are either their test is declining or they're just ready to juice because they've wanted to for however long. I think that's kind of where, at least in my community, the split tends to be. I I'm really hesitant to give peptides all of the flowers that they may deserve because I'm kind of trying to throttle the brakes on how much I want to push out to the community. Because I've seen climbers that climb in competition at a pretty high level, like V11, V12, which the hardest stuff ever done is like V17, V18. So by the time you get in, and most normal people clock out around like V4 to V7. So V11 is like a super legit climber. And he was running BPC and TB in between comp days so that he could limit the inflammation and come back fresher. And he had really good results with that. I know some boulders that were doing something similar. I've done something similar where during my deloads, I'll slam either BPC or KPB, ramp up the anti-inflammatory so I could be as fresh as possible going into the climb or my trip or my comp or whatever it is.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would think HGH would probably, because you always hear about how it increases recovery. Would that kind of fit that same role, do you think, in just being able to recover faster between comp days?
Yes and no. I think GH and climbing actually has there's a little more nuance to this. So on paper, I do think the GH is probably the best compound for climbers for an off season. But because of the water retention and the edema, I think that cycling off GH 3 days to a week prior makes a ton of sense just so that you can flush the water and be lighter on the wall.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's something, like, if you're not used to competing in like a weight sport, you wouldn't really think of. But that's interesting. I mean, I want to get into the big question though, like, how does GH affect tendon growth? Like, there's mixed information. People have varying opinions. Like, some people say it's the greatest thing in the world. It helps your tendons heal faster. Some people say it's not really going to move the needle that much. What do you think?
I mean, you can kind of look at the data, right? So or there are a couple different studies that I could pull up, but GH tends to increase collagen expression between 1.9 to 3.9 fold. So as far as hypertrophy for tendons, GH is the king on paper. The other part is none of this exists in a vacuum without load, right? Everyone knows that you could pin 600 milligrams of test per week and you will grow some muscle. Your tendons will not change if you just smash GH. But what's unique about GH versus what's a little bit different, at least in the animal models, and I'm going to get really nerdy about this, so bear with me. Um, is you need to have some sort of external load to remodel the tendons correctly. GH, you could just smash GH, hang out on the couch without any deleterious impacts to your tendons. If you're just smashing nandrolone, for example, and hanging out on the couch, I haven't seen in trained athletes, the tendons look fine. In an untrained athlete or in an untrained person, you might have weaker tendons for that because of the excess collagen buildup. I'm extrapolating based on data, but GH seems to be dramatically safer toward the tendons regardless and have better collagen remodeling versus any other compound in the literature that I've seen.
Okay, so basically, no matter what, if you're not doing the movements correctly, your collagen, like that's going to be not a positive thing. GH is neutral on its own. If you're using anabolics and you're not doing any correct movements for remodeling, that is a net negative, you're saying.
Yeah, probably. In general, you can take anabolics with addition, and as long as you're working out, your tendons will keep some relative pace. Obviously, if you're going too fast, too quickly, you're going to have issues. But as long as you are at least training, your tendons are going to be fine.
Okay. Do you think like there's a difference between low reps and high reps and tendon remodeling? Because I mean, one thing I've done just kind of like on the bro science side, I'm going through like knee physical therapy right now.
Mhm.
In order to kind of maintain some sort of growth stimulus, I'll do just like a heavy, not heavy, I would say, but like a set to failure or close to failure on quad extensions, but at like 25 to 35 reps, just so it's kind of like I feel like that would be less deleterious to the tendon during recovery, or am I mistaken?
Um, I would kind of add, like, I would defer to your PT on that. In general, I think you just need load. I don't think the amount of reps particularly matters as long as you're fatiguing it.
Okay. I mean,
Like,
I would just like if you're going extremely heavy, like I would think that puts more stress on your joints, right? And you can kind of offset that and still maintain stimulus with higher reps.
I mean, you just need stimulus. It doesn't really make too much of a difference as long as there's stimulus. If it's like assuming that you're not overtaxing the tendon, right? That's really the key. If you're doing 4 to 5 reps and it's within tolerance of the tendon, then it's fine. If you do 30 reps, that's fine. The real issue is not overextending it. And if you're trying to be like super safe about it, you could just go with isometrics rather than just going for full range of motion, and you could just start there and then build your way up.
Okay. I mean, I guess that's another question. Are isometrics able to actually build muscle in the same way that dynamic reps are?
Dynamic reps are going to build more muscle, but one of the things that you'll often see in rehab, and even with like finger strength, is oftentimes people will start with like isometrics, and that's what they'll use for rehab. So one of the ways that we'll do finger training is like you can do full finger curls, but a lot of times what'll happen is folks will just take a pinch block and then hold it for 4 to 7 seconds and do that on repeat after a little bit of rest. And that's enough to get some stimulus to the tendon.
Okay. Wow.
And also for just stuff like rehab, particularly for finger injuries, you'll see guys just even just press down on the fingers in like a doorway at like 30 to 40%, just enough to get some stimulus. And just that is enough to basically maintain finger strength while you're not climbing. So it'll slow your rate of decay pretty dramatically. Or if you're getting back to play and you're coming off an injury, that's a great way to get stimulus at like a 3 or 4 out of the pain scale and then increase pressure and resistance until you're ready to get back to it.
Okay, that makes sense. So back to kind of what you were saying as well, is your opinion that steroids or most steroids, as long as they're not overdone and you're not overdoing like muscular work, will not be overly damaging to tendon health?
So there's actually some research to support this. When they do tendon biopsies in steroid users, a lot of these like studies suck, unfortunately. They don't really go over like the doses or the duration or what's happening. They just found a group of people that got injured that needed some sort of repair, and they just like cut open the tendon and they're like, oh, looks fine to me. But yeah, as long as you're loading the tendon and you're doing gear, it's probably fine. There, like, look, there are certain steroids that are worse for tendons than others, right? Winstrol being an obvious culprit.
Hmm.
But for the most part, and also like some of the research gets super, super niche. I was doing this deep dive into DHT, and in when they gave exogenous DHT to male and female tendon cells, it did nothing for the male cells. It increased type 1 collagen, but decreased type 3 in female at low doses, but did nothing at high doses. And I'm like extrapolating, like I'm not 100% positive. It didn't mention this in the paper. This is just my gut feeling is when too much DHT crushes estrogenic expression, that is what limits the collagen signaling, which is why it got swamped by the men and the women had enough estrogenic signaling to be able to have that sort of shift. Whereas when you upped it, the DHT just swallowed it and you couldn't have that increase in collagen synthesis. So, like every compound has its own impacts on tendons in one form or another that's unique. I think you can kind of mitigate this by just having proper hormone balance.
Yeah.
Um, but we, but I will be crystal clear that the data on this is razor thin. And if that's what I'm able to pull on like essentially a bioidentical, and like with testosterone, it's pretty well fleshed out, and with growth hormone, it's pretty well fleshed out. There's like no data on this for stuff like Primo or for Mastron or Equipoise or something like that. Like they've done studies where it's like, okay, we're checking the overall collagen synthesis on like random cocktails of stuff, but it's very, very thin data.
What you're saying makes a lot of sense though, because more or less on a whole system's data, you need to have an optimal estrogen androgen
Mm-hmm.
balance for functioning everywhere in
Yep.
every tissue, no matter what. Um, and I guess I would probably say it's just due to a lack of data that we can't really say how it works in tendons there, but it's 100% plausible. Like you need estrogen for optimal collagen remodeling, no matter what. Any androgen is technically an opposing force against estrogens. It's like a seesaw. They each pull from this might not make that much sense, but because androgens and estrogen receptors are like sex hormone receptors, they come from like the same ancestral protein. So when you activate one, it basically steals the activity from the other, which is kind of the easy way to think of it is like a seesaw. Like if you have more androgen activity on a cellular level, it is going to decrease estrogen activity, even if you are not actually decreasing serum estrogen.
So that's really
So if
interesting.
yeah, and that's something Molecular talks about as well. He's kind of the one. Well, him and Todd Lee are two that have brought that up to me before. But I mean, it makes sense on a tendon level. Like estrogen is extremely important for collagen remodeling. If you are overloading androgenic activity without enough estrogenic counterbalance, I could definitely see that being detrimental, especially in line with how it affects other tissues in the body.
Yeah, I think you're also kind of steel manning the case for lower dose protocols for climbers. Like in general, we didn't talk about this yet, but I tend to keep most of my doses really low relative to bodybuilders. I tend to cap out around 350 to 400 milligrams per week. And this is actually a relatively new school of thought within the climbing community. The only other guy that I know that does stuff like this, who is a huge Winstrol fan, which is why I was just like, no, there's no way that this is the way to do this, is he'll do like 500 milligrams in an off season, then drop down to TRT to climb. But he doesn't believe in gear on the wall. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. There's no way that makes sense. You kind of proposed the idea of even lower androgens, which I thought was interesting. I tend to be like, yeah, maybe keep like your TRT to 125 if that's what you wanted to do. And you had a really interesting theory on that.
Yeah, I mean, That, and it's also like, if you're going to increase the androgens, make sure you have enough estrogen. And I think this
For
goes
sure.
across the board, for bodybuilding as well. Like, even just from a health standpoint, obviously there's like issues with, gyno. Most bodybuilders have had gyno surgery. In fact, most people, a lot of people know, I guess not everyone knows, but, yeah, I mean, yeah, if you're a climber, if you're not trying to get too big, maintain an adequate androgen estrogen balance. And the best way to do that is, with lower doses, and, push your test high enough to where you get enough estrogen, and then, throw lower doses on top of that if you want. And that, I assume that's kind of what you, preach as well.
Yeah. The way I tend to, most of the cycles that I'll end up doing will be like 200 tests, 100 primo or mast, and then the rest of it is usually Anavar. And that way I can keep my estrogen in the high 30s, low 40s. And yeah, then just run some GH on top. That tends to be the bulk of my protocols. Then again, I also will throw in some other stuff. Like I've tried running BPC and KPV concurrently, both for injuries, but also to see if you can get some increase in GH expression. I really like SLU a lot. I know that it's bleeding edge. As far as I know, I am the first climber to document using SLU over a year ago.
Wow.
I've also, for what it's worth, I know this is an N equals one, but my cardiologist said that my heart was beautiful and I should consider modeling, which is a compliment I didn't know I needed. So that's awesome. But I really like it both for the added endurance as well as like helping to push through a little bit more on fat loss during diets and stuff.
Okay. So, in your opinion, what are the best steroids for collagen synthesis? If like we're assuming estrogen's good, we're not really talking about the androgen estrogen balance.
Sure.
There's probably some that are better for collagen and probably some that are worse. Lay them on us.
Okay. So if you're only interested in collagen and you're not a rock climber, I would probably lean on DECA and growth hormone. Those are probably your two best androgens. In general, I think that both Primo and Mast are tendon neutral. So I would have no issues running stuff like that. It, one of the other things that I'll say outside of collagen, but just really cool compounds for climbing that I can sort of have like a a proven track record that this has worked in comp is something like SLU, Meldronium. I don't want to plug Cardarine because of like the possible cancer outcomes, but cardio boosters are criminally slept on by climbers. And there was actually a Russian ice climber who pissed hot for Meldronium after winning his comp. He hadn't won anything in 6 years, hops on Meldronium, smashes the comp, and then immediately
Wow.
gets banned for 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an interesting angle. So SLU, from what I'm aware of it, you need to run so much of it that it's like so absurdly expensive that it's not worth it. I might
Um,
be wrong on that, but that's one thing that I've heard.
I I don't know how much of this is placebo versus how much of this. So look, I think SLU also has like the ability to signal. So it's not, so you might get maximum signaling at higher doses, but even at 20 milligrams, I've tested this where I've got on the assault bike with nothing. I've got on the assault bike with Motzi, and I've got on the assault bike with 20 milligrams of
Wait,
SLU.
20 mil, isn't it? Don't the capsules usually come in like 500 micrograms?
I mean,
Or
yeah, but like, you know, I am who I am.
yeah, no, I think it's cool. I'm just like wondering, like I'm just kind of trying to get a realistic cost picture of like how
Yeah.
much someone would have to
If you look, if you
use.
go down the capsule route, you're screwed. You could get raws for like, or you can get like powdered SLU. I was getting, I think I got like 5 grams for like $100. I know a
Oh
dude
wow.
that dropped like $2,600 on 2 kilograms of SLU, and I was like, Jesus.
That's a okay. I mean,
By the way,
that kind of throws the peptide vendors in the trash a little bit,
I mean, we
which is
kind of know
a
what.
good thing.
I mean, look, we know what happens in North America, right? We pay like a domestic premium, but I so I have another friend that, so here are sort of the tiers, right? I know a lot of people that will run like a milligram of SLU a day. and they say they get something from it. I personally got like a minor boost on it, but like it's possible that that's placebo. I'm throwing that out there. I could be impacted by placebo like anyone else. When I run 20 milligrams, it's way more pronounced. I have friends that run 200 in 2 weeks. When my buddy shows me his cardiac scans, I will report back to you. If his looks as good as mine, that's stuff worth noting.
Yeah,
Also, that guy is
absolutely.
he's a bodybuilder that's had some like heart damage. So if he doesn't have deleterious heart impacts from running 10x my slew dose for like a few months, that's worth mentioning. But it's too soon to tell.
100%. Yeah. Um, and if you're interested in Cardarine, there's actually a drug called seladelpar that is an FDA approved non-cancer causing version of Cardarine.
Why don't we talk
Um,
about this more? Is it because it's like not a research chem and we can't
it
monetize it?
so it is yeah. It
Okay,
is
for
a
sure.
pharmaceutical. And it is approved though, but it has the same exact mechanism as Cardarine. It just doesn't last as long, and it's actually been through trials. Like it didn't have the same cancer-causing risk that obviously PhD. Here's my thing about Cardarine. PhD scientists, literally way smarter than any of us, whose job it is to assess safety on these drugs, determined it wasn't even worth the risk of studying on people.
Yeah.
Like there is no, I mean, like I guess in sport, if you don't really care that much, like that can make sense. But it's like for most people, it's like they just determined it wasn't even worth it, you know. And it's not like they were looking for a reason to stop it. Like these drug companies, they're studying it because they want to sell the drug. Like they want to find every reason to sell it. If they determine it's not even worth studying, like that is, that is a big deal in my opinion.
I've had a
um
similar conversation with a friend of mine who I tried to talk out of climbing on Cardarine, and I'm like, "Hey, probably don't do this. Super cancerous. There are like, can I interest you in any other compound that does this?" And he's like, "Nope, already bought it. Gonna do it." I'm like, "All right, fine."
oh
And
jeez.
like, look, I'm gonna use his data point and say, yeah, he did get a meaningful boost from running it. Does that mean that you should use Cardarine? Fucking no, dude. Oh, I can I swear on here? I didn't ask you
Yeah,
that. I
you
thought
can. Yeah,
cool.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
But like, there's no reason that anyone should be running Cardarine for rock climbing, even at like the pro level. It makes no sense. It's nice to know that mechanistically it works and it gives you a boost. And I don't think people need to run it to know that for sure. I think there are safer options. Like Meldronium, for all of its risks, was at least like FDA approved in Russia. Like it's a known commodity.
Yeah.
So,
And that
don't use
basically
it.
just shifts energy utilization towards carbohydrates, right?
Yeah, I think
From
it's
from what
carbohydrate
I've read.
skewed. Yeah, carbohydrate skewed.
Okay, which is obviously for people that don't know, a more efficient energy source. All of your cells run better on glucose. That's like kind of just how it is. So something that shifts your energy towards the most efficient source is going to be able to improve performance. Um, but are there any other, like, I mean, there's obviously bromantane as well, which is said to improve like endurance and cardio performance. Is that one you've looked into? Are there any other interesting cardio boosters you can tell us
There
about?
are like look, there are other interesting cardio boosters, but it's not necessarily something that I've run. I've seen uh there's a heart medication, I think it's called terzetamine, or I'll look this up. I was doing a lookup on some of the old Chinese swimming doping scandals. I could talk for hours about the Chinese doping. It's state sponsored and it's so crazy. Um, they also like they'll run low dose Clen for their swimmers too, which is kind of interesting.
Really? I
Yeah.
mean, I've found Clen to be a very potent physical stimulant.
Mhm.
So is that something that's also, I mean, just by virtue of that, able to increase endurance?
Probably, it's probably viable, but I'm still not ready to tell climbers that they should slam Clen. Um,
Well, you don't
I'm
gotta slam
gatekeeping.
it. You can.
You know what I mean. I'm not ready to like. There are certain things that I'm not ready to say are viable for climbers. And by the way, as more data points come in, I'll probably change my view on this. Like I think we've talked about this that I'm pretty anti-trend for climbers, and
Mhm.
it's still a viable tool. I just think that our androgenic load is slow. It's so low as is that safer tools can accomplish similar outcomes. That it's just not worth it.
Hmm. I mean, one use case I could see for tren is like muscle preservation, right? Like if you want to get lighter and keep some of your strength. But I mean, there's so many other variables that I'm sure like it
I,
might not be the best.
I mean, look, like you could do that on like 35 milligrams of tren a week or 70 milligrams of tren a week. Or you could just bump up your test a little bit, or you could just bump up your Primo a little bit, or bump up your Anavar a little bit. Like, sure, you could use tren, but is it worth the possibility of the neurotoxicity? Is it worth it for some of like the worst sleep outcomes? Like, there are other tools that can do that job, and you're trying to get down to like 6% body fat. You don't need striated glutes. Like, that's not
That's a
a
good
win.
point. Yeah.
And is it like, how much more meaningfully is the aggression between tren and just raising your dose of turinabol? Like, is it really that meaningful that tren is like the answer?
That's an interesting point. Like, does aggression actually help in rock climbing?
It can. It depends on the climb. Like, if you're like, there's a type of style of climbing that's just like jumping from thing to thing, and added aggression is awesome for stuff like that. But, you know, and look, I've tried it where I'm like, okay, I jump higher on turinabol than I do on Anavar. That's good to know. Do I run turinabol in my off season? No, but I'll have it around the house for when it's time to peak for my project. And in general, I think for most anabolic enthusiasts that are rock climbers, Anavar will get you there most of the way. Does having an extra like 4 to 5% in performance justify buying a new drug? Maybe it does for you. I mean, experimenting is super fun, but I don't think that you need to have you don't need to keep halo testing in the house just because you might be able to jump slightly further than you would on turinabol. Like, it's a fool's errand, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of it's individual, like you're saying too. Like,
Yeah.
that's good that you're able to note these things and kind of make individual changes.
And the other part is, because it's like an individual sport, it would be one thing if this was arm wrestling where it's me versus you and I've got to beat you to make it to the next round. But if I don't climb my project, I just go back later, I go back next year, whatever it is. There's like, outside of the frustration of just not getting it done on the day, which is really common, you fall until you don't. I feel like the incentive to really sacrifice your body and health to something that you could come back to, it's not as high in my opinion. Like, I could, if you fuck up your peak on your bodybuilding show, that screws up 16 or 20 weeks of prep, and that's in front of all of your friends and family, and you've got to be good on the day. Same thing in arm wrestling or jiu-jitsu. Whereas rock climbing, it's like, okay, I'll come back next week, or I'll come back next month, or I'll come back next year. There's no downside that justifies it to increase your risk exposure, in my opinion.
Okay. Well, this is also a sport where there's like set competitions, right? Or are they kind of all mixed together?
So
Like, you
there
could go
are
one week and another week, or how does that look?
So there is a competition season for sure. They do drug test, and the drug testing is an absolute joke. And we could touch on that at some point if you want to. But
Sure.
they've been testing rock climbers for drugs, I think, since the 80s or 90s. And they've caught one dude for blow, one dude for weed, and one person for Meldronium, and one person for Winstrol. That's your total amount of drug test failures. It's not great. And it's because they're not looking. On average, they'll test athletes 1 to 3 times a year at most. Or that's not true. 0 to 3 times a year at most. I've spoken to Olympians that have never been blood tested. You might get piss tested, but I think they only have like 2 urine tests for any given event. So they're going to test the winner and a random person. So, they're not really trying to test the field. They're just trying to give you the illusion of safety.
Yeah. And that's at an Olympic level as well, you're saying?
Professional / Olympic. So rock climbing only entered the Olympics, I think, this past cycle. Or no, there have been 2 runs. There have been 2 runs in the Olympics so far. But even then, no one's been caught for doping since the introduction of the Olympics. They actually stopped releasing the doping data since they opened it up to the Olympics, which I found kind of interesting.
Wow. That is that is interesting. Yeah,
Also, drug
doping in
tests.
sports is it's a whole thing. Like everyone is on PEDs. Like it's not even like, I mean, tell us more about the Chinese, like you said, you've looked super deep into them and everything they're doing.
Yeah. So first off, drug test failures are bad for business. Let's just call it what it is. But the Guardian had a really interesting piece that there was a whistleblower that said from the 80s to the 90s, there was mandatory doping for over 10,000 different Chinese athletes. Like, this was not optional. This was, if you were on the team, you were on growth hormone. I could send you the article. It's pretty wild.
That is.
Yeah. So, and by the way, this is independent of just individual doping scandals that have happened where folks, I think in like the early, like in 2007, their team got popped for exogenous DHT. That
Really?
was, yeah, it was swimmers, a canoeist, a dude that threw hammers, I think. Or it was
Wow.
like hammer throwing or something like that. I don't remember what the exact sport was, but yeah, it was exogenous DHT.
The I mean, the goal behind that would probably just be aggression because I mean, DHT is not very strong as a performance enhancing compound as far as like strength goes. I mean, mental drive, sure, but I mean, that's interesting that they thought specifically DHT was so powerful that it was worth using in sport against all these other drugs. It seems odd, but it's just an interesting thing.
I actually don't know if it's because it was strong or if they thought they could beat the test with it. So I think a lot of doping in sport really boils down to, can I beat the test? And you can sort of look at the Russians for that. I'm if you guys haven't seen Icarus, for the love of God, watch it. It's so good. But Gregor Rodchenkov basically had folks swishing a cocktail of Tren, Primo, and Anavar in alcohol and taking it sub Q. And they actually did have different liquors for the men and for the women, I assume for dosing, so that they wouldn't virilize the women. Smart. The Germans or the East Germans didn't do that. But all of that was around beating the test, not necessarily because that cocktail was optimal for sport performance.
Hmm, that is a good point as well. Um, yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of silly. I don't know. It just seems silly they thought DHT. Like, there's got to be some other. I mean, there obviously are. Like, we don't know what wasn't in their system as well. Like you can.
Totally.
There are so many modifications on the board to steroids that haven't been done before. Like one I'm pretty excited for, and so are a lot of people. Is one vendor's actually coming out with a non-17 methylated Anavar. So basically, a injectable, non-oral, non-liver toxic Anavar, which
I
is pretty
wonder
crazy.
I wonder if that'll beat a drug test.
Um, it may, it
I,
may.
I
I don't know if because the doping metabolism has to do with like I don't know if the 17 methyl group stays through metabolism. I'm not sure honestly,
I'm
but
not sure either.
that's a good point. It probably would beat a drug test, at least at the start of, once it comes out and no one has it yet.
By the way, if anybody is competing in tested events, SLUPP 332 is still technically not banned by WADA, so you could run about as much of that as you would like, and it's not even on the watch list yet. If it's not banned in the 2027 season, they're asleep at the wheel. But yeah, it's still technically WADA compliant.
How dramatic is the cardio effect on that?
For me, it was like 30%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have you used ITPP?
No.
Okay, this is one you're gonna actually love, I think. So ITPP is basically an inositol molecule with a bunch of phosphates strapped to it. I can't remember the full name, but if you Google ITPP, that's what it is. It basically increases the binding of oxygen to your red blood cells. So your red blood cells carry more oxygen. In mice, it increases endurance stupidly. It's now banned, I believe, in sports. They abused it in horse racing like crazy.
Of course they
But
did.
it's not toxic. You can throw like you can go insanely high with the dose, and like it kills okay, I'm not trying to endorse, I'm not trying to be like a salesman, because
Sure.
it's obviously a research chemical, just for people watching. But like, it's being tested for cancer right now. It kills cancer.
That's crazy.
Because it increases your body's like oxygenation, and tumor oxygenation is basically, killing the tumor. But is insanely potent for endurance. It's you basically can't overdose on it. Another effect is in mice, it makes them lose a lot of weight by fat. So improves body composition. But I mean, for me, I've used it before. A just dramatic increase in energy overall. It's kind of like an anxiolytic effect. Like, you can kind of imagine just what like more oxygen being through, like carrying through your blood feels like. That's sort of what it does, and that's what it feels like.
So one, if you're an alpinist and you were listening to this, so one of the questions I got is what are the better ways to adjust to altitude? Because folks you like Everest is pretty chill, but K2 is its shorter, harder cousin. And adjusting to altitude, climbers have been abusing dexamethasone for a few decades now, but alternatives are what folks are looking for. I have heard, so there have been studies into running EPO, which actually was not effective, but ITPP sounds like it could be more advantageous than something like an EPO, or I've heard of folks running an EQ anadrol combo, which conceptually seems okay, but based off of the mechanisms in the literature, I don't think it would move the needle. There was also a really interesting test on Tadalafil, which, if you didn't deal with the headache and nausea of just running it at altitude, it worked really well too. So for 80% of people, it's really effective.
Okay. There's one that's way better than slamming EQ and Anadrol. It's called Roxadustat.
I don't know that
Maybe
one.
you've heard of it. It
No.
directly increases EPO synthesis, and increases like hematocrit very significantly. It's for that indication, but it's not like a steroid, and it has I don't think any detrimental off targets. So that, if people aren't using it, that could be something that's very good for adapting to altitude, as well as the ITPP. What do you think about like antihypoxins?
I think that's what dexamethasone is. I'm gonna double check that on my phone so you don't hear my loud ass keyboard. For what it's worth, EPO didn't help, which was kind of surprising to me.
Yeah, well, because naturally at altitude, humans, their hematocrit goes up.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting finding. But I mean, if dexamethasone, I know you're looking it up right now, is an antihypoxant. Have you heard of something called amoxapine succinate or
No.
succinate? So that is a Russian antihypoxant, prescribed for alcohol withdrawal, cognition, recovery after stroke. And if you are on it while you have a stroke, you will lose far less neurons, which is interesting. I take it every day personally. It's very good for you. It's an antioxidant, lowers triglycerides. It's a derivative of vitamin B5 as well.
Interesting.
And I'm not sure how, like, I've been like skiing before. I would use like ITPP, amoxapine, and that would basically be my stack for, like, just not like, being a beast on the mountain. So I'm for climbers as well, if they're looking to adjust to altitude.
Yeah, honestly, I think some of the questions I get are from alpine climbers. I'm going to try to push this out to as many of them as can hear so that they could find you in your community. The short answer is the climbing community is not curious enough on PEDs to get an edge. They kind of say, oh, that's aid. And I'm like, no shit, it's aid. We're trying to not have people die in the midst of like ascents. That's stupid.
They said it's what?
Aid. So that's like kind of a derogatory word of like you're getting help. So it becomes a meme, right? So aid climbing is a style of climbing where you'll use tools to get up a mountain.
Oh, okay, I
But
see.
then they're just saying everything is aid, like chalk is aid and arms are aid and legs are aid, things like that.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So they're kind of lumping PEDs into the same like
Yeah.
category of like you're a sissy, you're using help,
Yes.
pretty much.
Yes.
That is very interesting. That is, I mean, you kind of see that across all of sports in general. Like people think PEDs are cheating. When it's kind of funny, we cheat literally every other way in our lives every single day. Like technology is supposed to make things easier. That's like it's like the whole point. Like why you don't like people saying like, well, why didn't you see your natural potential before you started gear? That'd be like saying, well, why didn't you see how far you could walk before you hop in your car?
For
Like the
sure.
car is there for a reason. Like you, I mean, I respect it, but thinking that there's merit in doing something harder just for the fact that it's harder, like I feel like that doesn't like that's not consistent across anyone's life.
So by the way, the climbing community is famously aggressive around stuff like this. I mean, there are battles in the culture that go back to the 60s. So there was a rivalry. By the way, if you guys ever want some really great climbing propaganda, there's a movie called Valley Uprising. I highly recommend it. And there were basically two schools of thought at the time when they were climbing El Capitan, and they were aid climbing it at the time. So they were using tools to climb up. There was Warren Harding, not the president, a drunk and a hilarious dude, and a guy named Royal Robbins. And one guy wanted to keep it pure and do it for the aesthetics. And the other guy's like, fuck it, dude. I got tools. Let's fucking bolt this all the way up. And these guys would like get in the brawls, cut each other's bolts. It was like this crazy rivalry. And there's always just this internal battle in climbing between safety and danger. So when sport climbing became a thing in the 80s, where they would put bolts in the route, but you would bring your own quick draws up so that you could place protection that you wouldn't have to like put in a crack that you could take with you. Initially, all the climbers were like, no, this is stupid. This isn't climbing. And then it became accepted and then it became part of the culture. And the same thing with crash pads for bouldering. People used to just fall on the ground and like eat shit. It was crazy. And then they started making, or they took out mattresses and that became crash pads. And they're like, you guys are pussies. Who uses crash pads? And now we all use crash pads so that we can climb. It's great. So I think eventually I'm going to break through and more folks are going to dope and it's just going to become part of the culture. But right now, there's just like, no, that's pushy shit. You can't climb. I'm like, I don't fucking care, dude. I'm doing my thing. I genuinely don't give a shit.
Yeah. No, and I think I mean that's how it's going for a lot of sports, like you got
Yeah.
like the enhanced game. So I mean it seems like you're one of the pioneers, especially, for climbing. Like you said, there's really no one that's into this stuff, but that's yeah, that's really interesting, man.
I appreciate it. And look, they're like at this point, when I started this project, it was me and my dogs. And now we have over 70 people in the Discord, which is cool. And there are people from various different disciplines of climbing and sports and whatnot and in there, and that's great. I right now I think most of the folks that are doping are either in climbing anyway, are state sponsored, or it's probably just guys like me that are recreational climbers that have no interest in the bleeding edge of the sport, but are just really into the pharmacology. And, if I climb V11 doesn't hurt anybody, I'm sure if the first person to climb V19 is juiced, that will cause some sort of stir in the climbing community for sure. And I understand why. But it's becoming, folks are starting to have the conversation. I think in about 2 years, it'll be a little bit less hated. It'll be a little less hated.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, things are moving quickly too. Like I mean, even 10 years ago, it was like a question whether a lot of these Instagram guys, influencers were like natural or not. And now it's like everyone is on something. And no one even tries to hide it anymore. So that's reflective of like just how fast that happened. Like you can kind of see how that translates to other sports as well, or will be at least.
I think peptides are really going to be the thing that is going to drive the industry forward on that. And I really want long-term data as soon as possible, because the short-term data as is, like, people are already abusing stuff in climbing. One of the things I say is don't kill the messenger, but we're past the point of like the Nancy Reagan just say no stuff. Like, folks are doing this right here, right now. Comp climbers are using BPC, TB, KPV right now. They are using it for the anti-inflammatories to peak for events. They are using it to recover from injuries, whether it's a fucked up back, fucked up fingers, torn hamstrings, and they're recovering faster, they're climbing better, they're taking fewer breaks from injury. And, do these compounds on their own increase your rate of development better than being natural? I don't know. Mechanistically, it's plausible, but we don't know. But it's undeniable that it's helping people recover from injury. My only fear is I don't want people banging this stuff year round. I feel like that's not necessarily set for success until I see good long term data. In the event that, BBC really doesn't spread the rate of cancer and the angiogenesis doesn't have any issues downstream for any health issues, cool, run it year round. But until I start seeing that data in humans, and especially with some of the stuff I've seen of TB 500, did you see the rodent organ data where the organs were were subdividing at similar rates as embryonic cells?
So organ growth, basically.
Uh, Not necessarily organ growth, but just rapid rates of cell division, regardless of tissue selection.
No. And what was like? I mean, the theoretic danger in that is what, like cancer, or what are we like?
Sure.
What did they find in the?
They just
Like,
kept
was
it
it just
there.
that?
So, one of the things that I don't think most people realize about collagen is it's not like there are three types of collagen. I think there's six or seven. And some is organs, some is cartilage. So, if you have certain compounds that are less selective, you could just start having this rampant growth in other places. Like Cardilax on paper has some really interesting properties as it relates to collagen, like for type 2 collagen for joints and things like that. But, and I could see how limiting apoptosis for that kind of tissue would be beneficial. But I don't know how selective that happens to be. And turning off cell death for certain tissues might not be beneficial. So I just want to see more data. It's not, by the way, I would love to be proven wrong and that this stuff is like as safe as water. But until I see the data, I'm like really hesitant to just say, hey, because you feel better right now, it's going to be cool in 2, 10, 5 years, stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think right now, like just based on how potent it is for injury recovery, like it's almost like we can warrant it for that with some risk. Like obviously we can't
Sure.
say. But yeah, I agree that just because we don't have long-term data, like we can't say. Like we can say it might do this, it might do this, like it might cause cancer, it might grow cancer, it might be totally fine. Like we can't um and there's not really a use case for running it year round as of now. Like I mean, there's better compounds for it. Like we're saying, like androgens are more selective, muscle selective. Even I mean, HGH kind of carries some similar risks, but even that we have long term studies on. Like we know the risks, we know what it does. So yeah, I think that's a good point to bring up to people.
Yeah. And like I said, using it for injury recovery, super based and justified. Getting back to your sport or just healing better instead of being out for months at a clip, that's an obvious no-brainer. But to just slam that on a Tuesday because your climbing project is coming up, I I get it, but I don't think that that's the best use of that compound unless you're one of those climbers that solos all the time, throws caution to the wind, and you're not planning on living past 40, in which case, sure, you do you.
Yeah, then you do whatever you want, but
Um,
that's a different philosophical discussion.
Unfortunately, the climbing community, like the bodybuilding community, has a lot of people that like hanging out very close to the edge. And I see climbers dying about as often as I see bodybuilders dying. And yeah, it's hard to see.
Wow. Yeah, that's from like risky climbing practices,
Base
mostly.
jumping is pretty common. So Alex Honnold said this thing that no free soloist ever died doing something bleeding edge. And I think that's true. But, if you free solo weekly, you only need like a piece of rock to fall off once, or just have like you space out or something, or a mosquito gets you in just the right way, or a bird shows up, or a tarantula, and you freak the fuck out. And most of those guys are good at holding composure. But, if you have something that's going to happen 0.001% of the time, but you just keep adding instances of like putting yourself in that position, it just raises the likelihood.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Um, have you looked much into KPV?
Yeah, I ran KPV for my last injury protocol. I like KPV a lot.
That's one that doesn't carry a lot of the same risks and can sort of be ran year round. Am I correct in that?
Yes and no. I don't think it. I think KPV might have some downstream suppression of the immune system, just because you're suppressing or your inflammatory state. Your immune system may take some time off, and I don't think that that's inherently good. That's a theory. I don't know if that's definitively correct, but yeah, KPV is a thing that you could potentially run for like the inflammation going into like a peak project. Also, what's really interesting about KPV is it seems to prime the body for collagen synthesis. So it basically, what it does at the cellular level, don't quote me exactly on this, but it basically preps the body and turns on the signaling for the collagen turnover, rather than just like having to, and it does that by calming the inflammation so that the body is like, okay, now it's time to turn over collagen. And it just speeds up that process.
Yeah, yeah, and I've seen that. Yeah, because I mean, like some inflammation is beneficial, especially at like the start of an injury, but it needs to
Mhm.
calm down so that your body is able to actually organize and heal. Because if there's too much inflammation there, it will suppress healing. So
Yeah.
that's exactly what I've learned about KPV as well. GHK-Cu is another one that I think probably has potential to be ran for like year round
Yep.
forever.
Yep.
Um, just for, I mean, I think it has potential, like mechanistic potential as an anti-aging agent. Upregulates collagen synthesis, obviously, nerve growth factor. I believe it was, which is neuroprotective. Copper is
Mhm.
something you need to live. You do need zinc as well. Zinc and
Yep.
copper are sort of like counterbalance. So, and there's also a disease that some people don't clear copper efficiently. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but if you have that, GHK-Cu may pose a risk.
Yep.
But I mean, other than those conditions, like what's your thoughts on GHK-Cu overall?
I mean, outside of the fact that it hurts like a motherfucker to pin, I like mechanistically, it's really interesting. I saw one person drop a theory that GHK might be less beneficial when you're younger and more beneficial when you're older as your reserves go lower. And conceptually, I buy that. I don't know if overclocking and just having super physiological levels to habit has has a net increase above just hitting what your maximum threshold is. We need more human data, but I definitely think that it's beneficial for older people. And also, where I think climbers would get the most use from it isn't necessarily from pinning it, but using it as a topical. So there's a GHK gel in phase 2 trials for wound closure, and it's already shown to be really effective at closing cuts. So for climbers that
Wow.
tear their fingers on sharp climbs, I think it makes a ton of sense to take a topical GHK to speed up wound healing on your fingers.
That is
One
really interesting.
one
Is it so
thing
that's going to be a drug,
Yeah.
basically?
Yeah. I think the delivery system is what they're trying to patent. I think you could take a topical, like I've used a topical on my fingers and done it that way, and that's been pretty effective. I wouldn't run the topical as a climber all the time because it does soften the hands, which as a climber, you want a little bit of toughness for the calluses. But if you're only climbing sandstone, yeah, you could rock that year round or just use it on your face like a normal person. I should probably get onto that. I've sustained some sun's damage over the course of my life.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's I mean, yeah, heals of collagen all over the body, so
Mhm.
even injectable if you did that. But I didn't mean to cut you off. I think you were about
No,
to
you're fine.
say something else, or like
No,
another.
no, I think that was basically it. I'm not sure how much GHK will benefit tendons. Like mechanistically, it seems like it should, but it's so hard with tendons because there's just such a long ramp time to get there that it's really hard with attribution. And really with a lot of the tendon compounds, because they're a slower burn, figuring out what percentage one compound versus another is moving the needle is really tricky.
I believe I saw a study actually basically on Glowstat combining GHK with BPC and TB. And maybe you've seen this as well, but it was pretty synergistic
Yeah,
in that context from what I remember. So as a standalone agent, maybe not, but in combination, I think I remember also seeing it actually increases the likelihood that there will not be as much scarring and it will be more organized collagen deposition,
I would
if
guess
I
that that's
remember
from
correctly.
the. I would bet that that's the KPV and the GHK if I had to guess.
Okay.
I haven't seen that actual study, but just anecdotally, what I've seen in my community, there is a synergy between all of them. BPC on its own is kind of whatever, but then you pair it with TB or you pair it with both and KPV, and the outcomes just get dramatically better really fast.
What do you, so this is a controversial one. I have a stance. What do you think about the local injection versus sub Q, or does it matter where you inject
It might matter a little bit. So here's what I'll say. If you have a medical professional that's going to get in there and do that for you, that's fine. If you're a climber, don't pin your fucking fingers. We've had this, or any climber has had this thought, right? Oh, if I need to pin closer to the area, then surely I should pin my fingers. No, don't do that. I actually asked Todd about this, and he's like, yeah, if you hit a nerve, it could potentially cause damage. You do not want it to go necrotic. Do not pin your fucking fingers. So shout out to Todd for keeping me safe, and by extension, other people of the climbing community. But here's what I'll say about things that aren't fingers, right? I have friends that have injected sub Q and their ACL healed in 3 weeks. So would it have healed in like 18 days or 17 days versus 19 days if it was injected closer? Maybe, but you're still seeing really good recovery times.
Yeah. And I agree with you. It appears to be a systemic effect in animal data as well. And if we go based on other peptides, like you don't get tanner in the spot that you inject the melanotan to.
True.
You get tanner everywhere. Similar with HGH. So I mean, there may be a greater local effect, but these peptides do go systemic.
So for what it's worth,
And I mean,
Steve.
more evidence for that. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Finish up.
Oh no, you're good. I mean, more evidence for that is injection also improves like gut healing.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's direct evidence that you don't need to have it directly at the wound site. Though I mean, like I agree with you. I've tried to inject it like near my knee, near my ankle. It's just a pain, and then it's itching super bad. Like I don't know. I just don't think like it's just easier to inject it in the glute, find a spot that doesn't hurt where you pinch it. That's not going to burn if you inject it right there, and I think that's the best way to do it.
I'll level with you. I think some things are more systemic than others. I do think GHK is probably more topical or more localized than some of the other stuff. I don't know if you've ever sort of had that skin plumpeting from a GHK shot,
It
but
leaves welts. It leaves welts and bruises every time.
yeah, I could imagine GHK having more of a localized effect, but that's not even the one that you want to have the most localized effect anyway. So, just go sub Q.
Yeah. And I think it might also have something to do with like the way that the copper binds at the injection site, causing issues. I'm not 100% sure though, but I mean, there's also data showing HGH can have a local effect. I think it was a study in mice. They basically like put a cylinder on each like spot on their back. They treated some with HGH and some not. and the cylinders where HGH was injected on their skin that was kind of cut off had more like cell proliferation in IGF-1 than the ones where it wasn't. So even HGH appears to have some local effect, though obviously it does have, you know, systemic effect. That part's not really up for debate as far as we know.
I mean, here's sort of what I'd say to that. I think whatever you can tolerate that you can do consistently matters the most. If you're a climber and you want to just smash pin your forearms with GH, God bless, dude. You do you. I would be more interested in you having good adherence than folks trying to aim for what is the most optimal. Like whatever gets you from where you are to your destination is best. If you're one of those psychos that wants to smash that repeatedly and maybe get some scar tissue, cool. For most people, you know, rotate your sites. That's really best practice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I mean, we covered a lot today.
Do you want to talk? Do you want to talk trend before we call it?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, what do you got? What ideas do you want to bring forward, Barry?
No, you were talking satellite cells, and we were having friendly disagreements, and I wanted to have this out publicly because I think that your theory has some merit, and I think my school of thought has some merit, and I think it's worth just putting it forward.
Okay, yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, so I was basically just telling Adam. So I somehow, like I said, I'm dealing with some injury recovery. I added in tren. My joint pain miraculously, well, not really, like it went down noticeably. Like I noticed I would recover, like I would do a day of like PT work, and usually I'd be like my tendons would feel sore the next day, the joints would feel sore. It just wasn't. I was like, whoa. I'm also running HGH and Clo Stack, so that definitely plays a role. I can't attribute it to the trend, but it was worth, you know, I mean, I like researching this stuff, might as well look into it. Trend increases satellite cell responsiveness to GH and IGF-1 and also satellite cell number. Satellite cells are mostly for muscle proliferation, like muscle growth. And that's why partially why trend is so potent. But they also can drive improved healing outcomes in certain injury models. Particularly, I saw one, it was a rotator cuff model where the genes were sort of like overlapping as far as like satellite cell function and tendon repair. And it can, like, you can kind of think of it if you're like speaking bro science terms, like it increases, well, the science is that satellite cells can help repair at the muscle tendon junction, which essentially all androgens will do anyways. So like it's not trend specific. Trend is just very good at this particular thing. But that is, I mean, that's a mechanistic way that trend in a low dose without being overly pro-inflammatory and also without being, you know, wrecking your sleep or making you way too strong for your own good could be potentially helpful for tendon healing. Just a theory, just like there's some mechanistic angle there. It is not proven by any means, but I just found it interesting, you know, my experience, how my joint pain went down. But this guy, you know, Adam knows, he's researched further, I would say, about the collagen and injury recovery piece, you know, given his sport. So, you know, curious your thoughts on this as well.
Honestly, it's like a really interesting use case. I just realized when you were asking me what compounds folks should take to drive collagen, I forgot to mention Anavar. I don't know how that happened. I've made like 5 videos on Anavar. The fact that I forgot that is ridiculous. But here's sort of what I'd say. I think it's plausible, the satellite cell hypothesis. I'm not dismissing it. I don't think that at all. I think it's plausible. But you're already taking GH, you're already taking Clo. And the question that I sort of posed is, was it the trend that pushed you over the edge, or was your state of recovery already good by the time you added in the trend? And you said that trend has a synergistic effect with IGF-1. And like, sure, but your test, your growth hormone, your Clo is already driving up your IGF-1 as is. So is it that the trend is really taking you above and beyond, or you just happen to add something around the time that things were already getting better? What was really interesting to me is you mentioned that you had issues with Anavar, and there are rotator cuff studies being done right now post-surgery on VAR. You said it made it worse. And I'm not going to dismiss your experience. I just, in the literature, or we can go into the nuances on the literature of that, but it does, in the short term, spike collagen synthesis before causing a trough. I've extrapolated that if you continue to give stimulus, you'll continue to keep elevated levels of collagen synthesis. According to your anecdotal experience, you feel otherwise.
Well,
I'm not going to dismiss. Yeah, go for it.
I would. My anecdotal experience almost aligns with that.
Yeah,
because it wasn't like, it was like I would feel more sore the following day. So that aligns with, during my training, plausibly collagen was boosted. You go to sleep, next day it's not boosted anymore, and it recovers slower. Another thing I noticed, VAR increases my heart rate and makes it hard for me to sleep. So that may have hurt my recovery. It also made me way stronger. So that is another thing where it's like, perhaps I was going too heavy, or I was doing too many reps. Like I'm sort of kind of trying to juggle like doing the PT stuff and also ideally providing growth stimulus as well. So like, it's not like a perfect scenario where the Anavar anecdote like is 100% clean. But once I stopped using Anavar, I noticed I would recover a little bit faster after my sessions.
okay.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting. I think it had probably a few different angles. Like I was going too heavy. It was hurting my sleep slightly. So I think that might be what was going on there. But I think, it might be worth testing for me to, like, if that's the case, Anavar has a pretty short half-life. If it boosts collagen but then causes a trough, you might want to even be taking it like twice per day to maintain that sort of boost. Or what do you
In
think?
the medical literature, that's what they do. They'll do morning and night administrations, and they'll do that for burn victims. So Anavar is typically used for burn victims, in part for muscle wasting, in part to drive collagen. But I'm curious to see what the rotator cuff data looks like when they finish it up over at the University of Southern California. When I first started training with Anavar, the first thing I did was I would dial back for the first week or two until I sort of adjusted. And I was running it every day at the time. Now that I'm a little bit deeper in my journey, I don't know if I would continue to run it daily or if I would just run it pre-workout. I think both schools of thought are valid. I think if you wanted to run it twice daily, I think that makes sense. One of the guys that I've talked to that does it, that's what he'll do. He won't go sublingual. He'll only go oral. He wants to extend out the half-life and he'll run it twice a day. That guy does some crazy shit though. That guy ran a protocol where so there's a very famous climbing study where they would do these things called Abrahams at the beginning of the show. When I told you do 30 to 40% intensity in an isometric and do that once or twice a day. This guy would do that 3 times a day in 8-hour blocks. So like every 8 hours he would do this, and he would pin growth hormone and GHK to try to maximize the stimulus effect. And he claimed he got a really noticeable uptick in one of the grips, his 3-finger drag. It's an N equals 1. It's kind of hard to say that like that definitively moved the needle, but this dude's been on gear for a while, has trained for a decade plus. I do trust what he says. Like, I don't think he would, in his like late 40s, early 50s, get 20% stronger in this lift out of nowhere and it having no attribution to GH and GHK. But I also think living your life like that is kind of unhinged. So God bless.
Yeah, no, that is cool. It's crazy how in sports like bodybuilding, or just anyone using PEDs in sports, like every little anecdote, like some of them are so unique and they can tell us so much. Because there's no study, probably never going to be a study with that situation, which is, it's just really cool to think about,
Yeah, it's one of those. The reason I also love bodybuilding is you could never ethically force someone to do the things that they're choosing to do to themselves. They have to want to do that to themselves. And, I have no idea how many supplements you take on the daily or how many times you're pinning at any given portion of your journey. But yeah, we're an interesting breed, man.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, I think this is probably a good spot to wrap it up. I really appreciate you coming on, Adam. We will, yeah, stay in touch. I'll be putting this on YouTube. Do you have? Yeah, you do have a YouTube channel. We can,
Mhm.
make this definitely a collab one. But yeah, appreciate anyone that stayed till the end. Thanks for watching. And peace out.
Chris, this has been a pleasure. Appreciate you, man.
Yep. Thanks, Adam.
Take care.